disaster. This becomes a common theme in Scripture when Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. The last section in the Sermon on the Mount is two roads that we can take. We can take the road that is narrow, that few find, but that is a road of blessing that leads to life as it follows the wisdom and instruction of Jesus, not just hearing the things that he says, but doing those things that he calls us to do. There are also the two trees. You can choose just like you can choose the path to life or the foolish path to destruction. You can choose the tree that is of good fruit or the tree that's of bad fruit. You can build a house on two kinds of foundation, either a solid foundation of rock, which is, as Jesus says, those who hear my words and do them, or you can build on a shifting sand that will eventually lead to the destruction and fall of the house. So Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount takes up that wisdom. I also want to read James chapter 3. In our New Testaments, James is the wisdom literature. We think of it as a letter, and it is, but much of it is fashioned after the wisdom literature of our older testaments and also the preaching of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. James, who wrote the book of James, we believe this James is the Lord's brother, and he takes a lot of the same tact that Jesus took in expressing the wisdom of God. So in James chapter 3, and I'm going to read for us in verse 13 down through 18. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and self-ambition exist, there will be disorder and every evil practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. That reading in the book of James picks up on a lot of themes we already have noticed as we've worked our way from Genesis to this point, the wisdom literature of our Bibles. For instance, there is the mention that when we choose the path of foolishness, then that leads us into verse 16 says, disorder. We've talked about the orderliness of life that God supplies us by his instruction, by his word, as opposed to the chaos, the disorder that where many people's lives end up. That chaos that was present in Genesis chapter 1 and the first couple of verses, when there was formlessness, there was emptiness, there was disorder, there was chaos in the world. And God has, beginning then with the creation of light, and then separation of land from water, and the filling of those, and putting mankind upon it. God has been bringing order to creation. And when we move away from God, we also move away from his orderliness into disorder and chaos for our lives and eventually for our destruction. So across our Bibles, in the Older Testament, in the words of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, in the book of James, we have this wisdom sort of literature that is here to guide us and to help us into safe and secure lives and a glorious eternity. So that's what we're looking for. So in Proverbs chapter 9, we are introduced to two ladies. And I'm going to, let's just read through it. It's not that long. The first lady that we meet in the first 12 verses is Lady Wisdom herself. Wisdom has built her house. She has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts. She's mixed her wine. She's also set her table. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places in the town. Whoever is simple, let him turn and hear. To him who lacks sense, she says, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed. Leave your simple ways and live and walk in the way of insight. Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse, and he who reproves a wicked man incurs injury. Do not reprove a scoffer, or he'll hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. Give instruction to a wise man, and he will be still wiser. Teach a righteous man, and he will increase in learning. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. For by me your days will be multiplied, and years will be added to your life. If you are wise for yourself, and if you scoff, you alone will bear it. So going back to the very beginning of that, about how wisdom has built her house, what we're going to have in the whole picture, you have people walking down a street. Along the street there are houses, and you pass by the house of Lady Wisdom. So her house is built, and it's built on 7 pillars. It has a good foundation. So we're back to that illustration that Jesus was using in the Sermon on the Mount. Have your house built on the rock, on the words of the Lord. Wisdom house is built on a solid foundation that will last, that is safe and secure. It won't fall down in the time of storm and in the time of distress. Not only that, but Lady Wisdom has prepared a banquet. That's what all that is about slaughtering her beasts and mixing her wine. Here's a banquet table, and people are invited by Lady Wisdom to come into her strong and sturdy and beautiful house, to sit at her beautiful table, and then to gather wisdom that is shared around the table, coming from Lady Wisdom herself. The simple are invited. Those who are not on a good path are invited to come into Lady Wisdom's house and to learn some insight and learn how to walk in the way of insight. It is noticed, beginning in verse 7, that one of the things that wisdom does is to give correction. It gives a rebuke. It gives a, don't do that. That's not the way to live, to those who are walking in wicked and evil ways. But it's mentioned that there are people of hard hearts and hard-headedness who will not receive a correction. They won't receive a rebuke. That'll just make them more determined to choose their own way and go their own way, even though it's leading to a bad place. But a person, and we can think about the parable of the soils that Jesus told and the good soil, the person who has a good heart and is searching for wisdom, searching for her truth, searching for real enlightenment that comes from heaven above, that wisdom that's from above, not the earthy wisdom of dissension and division and disorderliness, but the wisdom that comes from heaven. Those who are looking for that, when you go into Lady Wisdom's house and sit at her table, then you will receive instruction that begins with, verse 10 says, the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's a phrase that keeps coming up in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs opened with those words. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction, but the wise person will welcome it, whether that comes by positive instruction or whether it comes by rebuke. The wise person will be appreciative of the instruction of the way of righteousness. And if we will listen to Lady Wisdom, walk in her instruction, go her good ways, then here's what will happen. Verse 11, for by me your days will be multiplied and years will be added to your life. One of the phrases that I've mentioned from time to time, I'm sure in this class and other places, is that place that Peter quotes from the Old Testament that begins, if you would love life and see good days, then here's how to live. We, as people who are created in the image of God and placed in God's creation to live here, Since God is the one who created the world, and since he created us, then he knows how the world works, and he knows what's good for us. So if we want to live long and prosperous and beneficial lives, then we will follow the way of wisdom. We'll listen to her positive instruction, and we'll heed her rebukes. But if we insist on living by our own wits, trying to make our own way, and we'll find ourselves in places of darkness and of disorder and of destruction. So we want to love life and see good days. At the end of Proverbs chapter 1 is a great line that in the ESV reads this way, Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 33. Remember, fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge was verse 7. Here's the end of that chapter, verse 33. Wisdom says, whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. And you know, when I read those words, I think, that's how I want to live. I want to feel secure. I want to be at ease with my life and with my Lord and with creation and what's around me and what's coming. I want to avoid disaster. Well, wisdom says, if you'll listen to me, then I will help you to be secure and at ease and avoid disaster in your life. So that's the same thing that we're getting from Lady Wisdom in chapter 9 and verse 11. Listen to me, and your days will be multiplied, your life will be lengthened, and years added to your life. You'll love life and see good days. And so, if you're wise for yourself. It will benefit you. If you scoff, that will be a burden to bear. So there's Lady Wisdom. Now let's read verses 13 through 18, the rest of the chapter. And here is Lady Folly and how she contrasts to Lady Wisdom. The woman Folly is loud. She is seductive, and she knows nothing. She sits at the door of her house. She takes a seat on the highest places of the town, calling to those who pass by, who are going straight on their way. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. And to him who lacks sense, she says, stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know that the dead are there, and her guests are in the depths of Sheol. And what a picture that is as we walk by Lady Folly's house. She's loud and boisterous in that sort of way. She gathers attention. She is seductive. She doesn't know anything, but she can. Her talk is not substantive. As a matter of fact, it's destructive, but at least it's loud, and so you hear it and can't avoid it. And it calls to us, it appeals to our weakest natures, and so it is seductive. And she sits there at the door of her house at a high place in town. She makes herself obvious with where she is and her loudness and being boisterous, and she calls to those who are passing by. And so I tell you what I think about is what we call these days the hawker, the person who has a place of business of some sort, and sometimes it's a seedy business, depending on where you are. You can go to places in the world where there are red light sorts of districts, and a lot of those places have people who stand outside and who call to passers-by. Come in here, wait, see what we got in here. Stopping you in the street, see if they can't entice you to come inside, and you step through a dark door, and there's all sorts of evil things in there. So I think about the hawker, and that's what Lady Folly is doing, and she's telling. Now she says the same thing that Lady Wisdom said. Lady Wisdom said to the simple, come in here, and you'll sit down in a safe and secure place at a banquet table, and we'll talk about things that will enlighten your path and will make you a better person and will help you to love life and see good days and avoid disaster. But Lady Folly uses the same introductory word. You simple come in here, but she is, of course, seducing people into a life of destruction. And when you do step inside her, instead of a banquet table and remember, Lady Wisdom has slaughtered her beasts, and she's mixed her wine, and she has set her table. Well, what you find with Lady Folly is everything that's on the table is stolen. And, that appeals to some people, the forbidden. The stolen waters are sweet. To kids of a certain generation, the watermelon that tasted best was the one you stole out of somebody's watermelon patch. It's that sort of thing. So she serves stolen water and to add to what she considers the sweetness of that. And also her bread is eaten in secret for pleasantness. Because Lady Folly is inviting us into dark areas and dark things, and they are shameful things, disorderly things, things that we want to hide from others and hide from God, then isolation, when we follow the way of foolishness, one of the things that foolishness wants to do to us is to get us isolated by ourselves because we're doing secret things in the dark. Jesus will say later in the Gospel of John that God will shine a light on all of that. But Lady Folly, invites us into places with stolen food and where isolation is. And then here's the kicker, verse 18. You pass by this house. It looks like a nice house. It's not built well and could fall at any time, but it probably has bright colors on it and eye-catching things. If you were to look a little closer, you could see the cracks in the walls, and it could fall down at any moment. And what you don't know when you go in there, the dead are in there. And you know how strange things happen when you have a wicked person, strange things happen in basements? Well, her basement is Sheol. And you walk in there and you never come out. You end up in the basement of Lady Folly's house. Jim has an announcement. This is a good time for it. Jim? It's not on. You want this?
All right, good morning. I know several of you in here already, but if you don't know me, my name's Jim Cross, and what I'm doing is standing up the moving ministry again. It's been dormant for a couple years, and I'm going to be looking for volunteers. Now you're going, what am I doing in this group? Well, my target group is teenagers, 20s, and early 30s. Most of you don't fit in that group, I'm sorry to say. However, I almost guarantee everybody in here knows somebody in that age group. And all they may need is a word of encouragement. When we put the call out about a month ago for a sign-up sheet, I got one volunteer. I need more. Now let me explain a little bit what I'm looking for. One of the things is I'm looking for a list, and I'm going to put it on a big text group. And when there is a move, I'm going to text the group. I'm expecting less than a quarter of the people on the group to be able to respond in the affirmative because life happens. My kid's got a ball game that day. We're out of town that day. Whatever. That's the way the nature is. But if I can get a large enough group, we can get enough people to do the move. So you're not committing to the entire time on every move if you sign up for this. Why am I targeting this younger group? Not because they're young and strong, got strong backs. This is an entry-level service. A lot of these young people are scared that they would not come up here and talk in front of the group like I'm doing now. Why do I know that? Because I was one of those. Did not want to come up. But this is something to get them involved in. So the primary goal on the moving ministry is not to move. That is our secondary goal, and the people being moved really appreciate it. But it is to educate our young people in service. And this is a great thing to do. What I'm asking you is if you know someone, they may just need a little encouragement to go sign up. This is not overbearing. This is not a packing and unpacking service. We take pre-packed boxes and furniture and move it from their old residence to their new residence. We've done 2 moves so far in the last, this year. One of them took an hour and a half. We moved 100 yards from one apartment to another apartment in the same apartment complex. The second move took 3 hours, but that was because we had to move about 15 miles and did 2 trips, so most of the move was en route back and forth. This is not something where you're greatly committed, but it is something where the young people, when they can see the appreciation of the person being moved, can really learn about service. So there will be a sign-up list here at Levy Central, and I've probably left out half of one I wanted to talk about because this is like the 4th time I've given this speech this morning so far. Any questions? All right, back to Cecil.
Thank you, Jim. I don't have a question, but I do have an endorsement. The moving ministry was beneficial to me 4.5 years ago when I moved here. I lived originally, when I first got here, because it was a temporary housing, so I lived in the Levy senior housing for about 3 months until we bought a house. And so the moving ministry was beneficial, getting me from that apartment to there. And so, and then besides that, being involved in that, we've had a good time. Some of you might remember that pre-COVID, Ken Brown was in charge of that ministry, and he had his list, just like Jim wants to have, that he would text, and people would show up if they could. And then Ken and Suzanne moved to Greenbrier, and so he's not around anymore, and that list anyway was rather old, so we need to, but Jim stepped up and said he would love to be involved in this ministry, and so it's a good way to be involved, and also to get to know some good people, new people, and good people. All right, let's turn then to the book of Ecclesiastes. We talked about Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly in the book of Proverbs. The rest of the book of Proverbs, after chapter 9, it gets into the Proverbs and the sayings about how to live in ways that are good and useful and are a blessing to ourselves, a blessing to others, a blessing to the world around us, that are orderly. Some of it is positive instruction, some of it is rebuke, but if we're wise, we listen to both sides of that and find a good way. But then another portion of poetry and wisdom literature in the Bible is the book of Ecclesiastes. Song of Solomon is involved in that. The Jewish people, when they arranged their Bibles, put 1st and 2nd Chronicles in that because it tells the beautiful story of the development of the temple. But we're going to look this morning at Proverbs and then at the book of Ecclesiastes. So let's read Ecclesiastes chapter 1. The words of the preacher. Solomon is not mentioned by name. The person who is responsible for the book of Ecclesiastes is called the preacher. It's somebody who's got a word to give and is identified as the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So we infer from that this is Solomon, and also somewhat from Solomon's life that's described in the historical parts of our Older Testaments. We can see the connection between Solomon's life and what's written here in the book of Ecclesiastes. But here are the first words of the book of Ecclesiastes, verses 1 and 2. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes and the earth remains. Remember that when we did Lady Wisdom and Lady Folly in Proverbs chapter 9, one of the things that Lady Folly wanted to lead the helpless and hopeless souls who were listening to her, one of the places she wanted to lead them into was disorder, and James used that word. He wanted the way, the earthly wisdom, not from heaven, but earthly wisdom, is a place of disorder and chaos, not the place of security and comfort and ease and good things and blessing, but just of turmoil and trauma, darkness, disorder, and chaos in life. That's where foolishness wants to take us. And so in the book of Ecclesiastes, we have the preacher saying he has experienced that. When he looks at the world and by the experiences of his own life, then what he sees is a whole bunch of emptiness. So Ecclesiastes is a book that really has its own approach and its own outlook. It addresses the futility, the randomness, the absurdity of life that is actually reality in our fallen world. But God is redeeming us, and he's redeeming creation to bring us around to orderliness and to good things. But some of that disorderliness and chaos is experienced in our lives. We do have to watch when we read the book of Ecclesiastes because it presents, the preacher talks in the moment. So in the moment, he may be pursuing a way of folly, and he'll describe the way of folly. And he'll describe it in what seems to be a good way because that was the appeal of it. You know, Lady Folly's house is appealing. It's colorful, and she's outside and loud, calling it. So when you read the book of Ecclesiastes, sometimes you're reading things that when you read it, it sounds like it's being endorsed by the preacher, by Solomon, by the wise, but it's actually not being endorsed. He's saying, this is how I lived at the moment, and he'll eventually say, and here's why I gave up on that, because it wasn't leading anywhere. It was vain. It was empty. It didn't help me at all. And so there's that care that we need to take with the book of Ecclesiastes. And that word vanity that's there is a word for emptiness, a word for that place of darkness and disorder. And in the Hebrew language, it is the word Hebel, which, and the reason we note that, it gets used a lot in the book of Ecclesiastes, so it's helpful to know the word that he's using and what it's about. Hebel is the name that was given to the son of Adam and Eve who was killed by Cain. His name was, it's the same word, Hebel or Abel. It's that same word. And if you will remember the story of Cain and Abel, then Abel suffered unwarranted injustice. He was murdered. And he was murdered in a fit of jealousy. It was a violent, the world's first big violent moment. And it brought about an early end to his life. And so in our stories, he is named Abel because that was descriptive of what happened to him in his life. It wasn't through his own means and his own fault. It was his brother. He was trying to do well, but what was experienced was this unwarranted justice, undeserved violence, and an early end. Well, when we live Abel, we're going to experience those things as well. And that's what the preacher describes in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's all, at best, emptiness and nothing, and at worst, it is harmful and destructive to our lives. And so what the book of Ecclesiastes does is to present several ways that people attempt to live, thinking this is going to be good, this will work out, this will be good for me. And some of what he did was, of course, being Solomon and gifted with wisdom anyway, he followed the path of wisdom, but it ended up being the earthly wisdom rather than the heavenly wisdom that God wanted to supply him with. And that carried him into dark places when he was following his own, proudly going in his own way. And then there was all sorts of self-indulgence where he didn't deny himself any of the vices of the world. And I'm just going to live it up. Eat, drink, and be merry. Live it up. And then he found out living it up wasn't really living. It was able. It was vanity. And it was empty and actually was destructive. One of the things that he did, and we're familiar with this in Solomon's reign as king, I'll be a big builder. I will leave behind a legacy of cities and buildings, and I'll put my name on them, and people will remember me. And then he started observing what happened to other people, and they put people's names on things, and people would walk by a building, somebody's name on it, and say, "Who's that?" So there's that sort of vanity. I'll interject this little story. My brother lives in a suburb of Oklahoma City. And so that's put me in Oklahoma City. And Oklahoma, and in particular Oklahoma City, has a whole bunch of toll roads. You can put on your GPS and your phone when you want to go somewhere, avoid toll roads. And that's what I do when I'm there, because I didn't know to do that the first time I was there. And I would get on a road, and I didn't know I was going to have to drop money in a slot or get a bill in the mail, and when I could have gone another way. As a matter of fact, the first time that I visited Oklahoma City, my brother and sister-in-law gave me a sack, a Ziploc bag, just full of coins. So I'll be sure to have a coin when I would get somewhere. But those toll roads that are in Oklahoma City all have names of people on that. It was a road, and they're beautiful roads, well done and clean, and you can go pretty speedily on them. And of course, I don't know who those people are, but somebody connected somehow to Oklahoma City. But they've got that person's name on there. This is so-and-so's toll road. And after several days of not enjoying any of that myself, I told my brother, if you ever come to hate me and you want to do something really terrible to me, build a toll road and put my name on it. So that would be like the worst. That would be the worst thing you could do to me. So, but Solomon recognized that people try to leave behind a legacy, get their name, build something and put your name on it. And it doesn't really lead anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. So the preacher does come up with this philosophy that is mentioned in a few places. Look at Ecclesiastes chapter 9. We're going to read two of these, but there's more than two of them that are here. Ecclesiastes 9 and verses 7 to 9. Go, this is Ecclesiastes 9:7. Go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments always be white. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your vain life that he's given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do it with all of your might. So to live life as it's presented to us, as we're put here, God did put us here with a work and a toil. So there are blessings. We have food, and we have shelter, and we have a companion, and we have a work to occupy our time. So we want to do that. chapter 12, though, also tells us this in verse 1. But as you do that, chapter 12 and verse 1, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw nigh, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. And then you get to the end of the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. The end of the matter, here's the conclusion of the matter, of all that's been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. So selfish ambitions and jealousies and trying to outdo the other person, trying to build your own legacy and make a name for yourself, all of that is empty and useless. But knowing God, loving God, serving God, including God in life and the way that he designed it to be lived is the way to go for wisdom. Then let's spend a minute on chapter 3. So it's because of that, that sort of thinking in the book of Ecclesiastes, that we have the famous chapter 3 about there's a season and a time for everything. Because we go through life and good things happen and bad things happen, and we continue to live life until life comes to an end. So there's this poetic device that's used in chapter 3. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. And so we've been using John Mark Hicks' books, 80 Days Around the Bible. And in commenting on Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and we read through there, here's the good and the bad that we find in life. I'm reading out of our little booklet in the middle of the last of this chapter, something then that Hicks wrote. I quote him from his page 91. There is Abel. There's that vanity, there's the emptiness, there's the chaos, there's the disorder. There is Abel, and there is good. Something is terribly wrong with this world, and something is wonderfully good about it, too. For now, we lament the Abel, and we enjoy the good. And one day, as we continue to walk in the light of God's wisdom, then we will be brought to life rather than to destruction. All right, appreciate your attention today. Thank you for that.